Hello. We're going to talk about Abby and Libby, the Delphi case. Um, it's been the same story repeated for almost 9 years. In the first, in the beginning, there's a lot of truths that came out in the beginning that were squashed right away to never be allowed to resurface again. But for the ones that were around at the time, well, we know better. There's a lot of questions, and I don't really go for all the court documentation. That's all been fabricated. The whole trial was fabricated, designed a certain way. So I can't really rely on the judicial system just as well as I couldn't rely on law enforcement in this specific case. It took a couple years into it to figure out that I had to eliminate some things out of my own research because it really did, it was way too confusing. There's too many dead ends. I was in the rabbit hole for too long. I'd had too much information and it wasn't going anywhere, and it was just very confusing. Like you couldn't put it together. You couldn't figure it out no matter what you did. And Ellie didn't help. Law enforcement wouldn't give no answers, and they let people go crazy, They just allowed it. So basically what I did is I removed law enforcement from my own research, unless I needed them as like a reference point for, factual, for what little they did let out. Because they, law enforcement can lie all day long to further their investigation, or for whatever reasons. They can say it's to further their investigations, but they do it for whatever reasons to cover their own ass as well. So a lot of it's a bunch of hyperbole, you know what I mean? Just overkill too much. It becomes obvious after a while, especially when you got the damn sheriff was a suspect for a brief moment there. You just got too many interlocking pieces when it comes to that, like Judge Fouts, he had to resign. Well, we know why. That was all, within the first, year or so, when everything's scrubbed, you can't really find anything a whole lot, all that content was taken down, from Gray Hughes to Anthony Greeno to True Crime Jesus, all kinds of them. They just took their whole shit and took it all down. So you don't have really access to none of that stuff anymore. I remember like the first YouTuber that I remember that was covering it, one of the first, was Molly Golightly. And she was one of the quote unquote boots on the ground. That's what her title was, because she went to Delphi and she was going to walk the trail. And well, she got really spooked and she never covered Delphi again. They ran her right out of there. Delphi, they've run a lot of people out. Okay, either you comply or you get run out. Like I said, it's the same story over and over and over and over again, and it's a lie. But it's taken a while to have this story created, and it's been the same story. I said years ago that they took those 70,000 plus tips and used it for their own defense and their own story and for their own reasons. At some point in the investigation, Um, that, yeah, they definitely did shift their gears, because there's a lot of people, if you just look at who passed the polygraph and who failed the polygraph, that's pretty, look at all the people that have died, whether it be YouTubers, officials, look at all the people that have passed away. Look at those two things. You just look at actual facts. You don't have to listen to law enforcement all the damn time. Like the polygraph expert, she was a 27-year veteran for the Indiana State Police. She was intelligent. Her and her daughter, their house went up in flames with them in it, So there's a lot, you've got FBI agents that were killed in this. And that's another thing. In the first, 48 hours is pretty pertinent to any investigation, I would think. In the first 48 hours, they didn't, the media wasn't sure who dropped the girls off on the trails that day. And they would either say that they weren't sure, or they think it was a family member. But they weren't sure right away for at least the first, the night and overnight, over until the next day, to the next day, once they were found, right around the time, you know what I mean? But then it eventually came out that Kelsey had dropped him off. That was not originally stated to begin with. But whoever dropped the girls off were also caught on camera in those trails. So you've got Kelsey there. And Richard Allen said he's seen 3 girls. Now that could have been 3 girls, Abby, Libby, and Kelsey, because whoever dropped Abby and Libby off were also caught on camera on the trails, not just dropping them off. And then it was said that Derek had been in the same vicinity as the suspects and the victims for at least 20 minutes. You had Jerry Holman in the very beginning think and say publicly that everybody thought that Mike Patty was the first BG sketch, the old sketch. Cody Patty was out of jail unannounced. A lot of sketchy things with the family, like Kelsey said she took a shower in the morning and then turned around, dropped the girls off at the trail, went to Chase's house and took another shower. Why would she take 2 showers? It's just a lot of things, that just stuff don't kind of add up to me, You got a lot of family members that were supposedly out on the trail. So, and that's before Becky Patty and all of them were there. But, you would have to think that these girls, or at least Libby, they said that she had some Purdue classes. What 13, 14-year-old goes to Purdue classes? They said that she liked the crime arena. She watched CSI, Law and Order, stuff like that. And that's what she was taking classes in Purdue for. 13 and 14 years old, that's a high mark to be going to a Purdue University for whatever reason and taking classes at the age of 13, 14. Unless you're a prodigy child, which I don't believe Abby or Libby was. I don't know. But nonetheless, that, and with Kelsey saying that she would play or catfish Libby for the fun of it to see if, I believe that they were warned, because Derek turned state's evidence on some pretty big fish. You got to remember, Derek was a cook, so he himself was a pretty big fish. So I'm sure they knew that something was coming. down the pipe, you know. There were FBI in the area that day. Tina Rodell had called in the white car at 9 o'clock that morning, taking pictures and everything and sending them to Tobe Lesenby. So there was already law enforcement in the area. Family in the area, law enforcement in the area. I don't know if there was something going down, but I believe that they had been warned or somehow, some way caught wind of retaliation was coming. And in that event, I don't understand why the girls would be taken to the trails by themselves. And there was a lot of people on the trails that day. They say, you know, just happened to be no, there was a lot of fucking people in them trails that day. So it's hard to understand, you know what I'm saying? It just doesn't make sense. And then, you know, you have law enforcement that only searches for these two children for 5.5 hours in the middle of winter in February, and then calls off the search at like 11:30, saying it's due because of terrain and safety and conditions for the volunteers, and they didn't want to exert the people searching after only 5 hours. And they said they had hundreds and hundreds of people from all over different counties, states, blah blah blah, helping in the search, and they called it off after 5.5 hours, thinking they would resume it immediately come daylight. But that is not what happened either. They didn't resume the search until almost noon, and that's when they found the girls. So that doesn't make any sense to me, especially when it comes to two children in winter time. So I looked it up, and there's no way that law enforcement, especially with FBI being on scene and being involved in the search as well, there's no way that law enforcement is going to call off the search. The only way they call off a search for missing children is if all hope is lost or there is a hostage situation, and in that event, they would secure the perimeter, etc., etc. And in my opinion, I believe that that's probably likely what happened, because it was all called off about 11:30 at night. Call it off, and you don't turn the search back on until almost noon is ridiculous, for one. It's the middle of winter. These are two kids. So what made you decide to do that, to even call it off in the first place? Because there was people willing to look. And then I coupled with that, from the time that you called off the search until the time that you resumed the search, what was law enforcement doing overnight? What were they doing all night long? Because the perimeter was secured, like as in a hostage situation. The perimeter was secured. You had Pat Brown and Nate Miller, Deputy Nate Miller. He's law enforcement. They were at the back side of the cemetery. Then you had Mike Capitano, wasn't he like a volunteer firefighter? He was down by the river all night long. So you always wondered how are they going to get two girls in and out of there? It's a possibility the girls never left. But they had to have, because with all the Patties saying that, you know, the phone was pinging all over town, and then it came out that AT&T said at 10 p.m. the phone was not in the area. Libby's phone was not in the area of the bridge at 10 p.m. That's what AT&T says. And that would be right around the time that Mike Patty gave that interview that night to say that her phone was pinging around all over town, because it was dark out in his interview. So it's likely that that was the same night they found out, and that's how he knew. But, and again, I believe that was close to the same time where they had just interviewed Becky Patty, and she said, they have our girls. That's knowing, that's foreknowledge of it. Um, that's knowing she, like I said, I believe that they had been warned or they knew something was coming, and it was like a gotcha moment, like yeah, they have our girls, because almost like they knew. Um, and then when Mike Petty did, I believe the first press conference there, he made the statement, it didn't have to be this way. Well, that you could take that a million different ways as well. And then the comment, Libby's phone pinged all over town. Libby fought like hell, and one of them had multiple chances of getting away, but decided to stay with the other. That's a lot of information that would come out in the very beginning from the family, no less. Mike and Becky Patty. So those things kind of, you gotta, they gotta stick with you, a little bit, Um, so like I said, I think they knew what was coming. Like it didn't have to be this way, and they have our girls. Um, I believe they had an idea who did it. I'm sure Becky Patty did. She said some names. And to know that Libby fought like hell, blah. It was said that the video went on for almost 40 minutes. It was a long video. And it was said back then that media was used, and Ellie did confirm it. So we all believe it was a snuff film, and that's where the Anthony shots come in the drop box, because there was money on Libby's account, and that came from Doug Carter as well. So it could have very easily been a snuff with somebody plugging in with an auxiliary cord, all kinds of stuff. You got the switch and switchers. You can live stream from multiple devices. I think it's 9 devices. And you can go live. It's crazy. They got tech is just nuts. And if you know Delphi, and now what I'm seeing in Idaho 4, they can blur out anything they want. And in the Delphi case, I'm just going to take a wild guess. This is my opinion, is that this little bitty black box. It's probably, just a small black box, no bigger than a small handbag. And it's like a little stingray thing. And you carry it, and it deflects stuff, and it makes whatever it's taking a picture of you or you're on camera, it automatically makes it blurry or what. It's a little black box. I've seen 2 of them. I don't know what they are, but I've seen 2 of them. I've seen a lot of things. I've seen a lot of helicopter footage before it was censored. Channel 13, they completely removed their helicopter footage because they had some really good helicopter footage. Now it's up to each of these news agencies to release that. I mean, you could probably, maybe, I doubt if they would, but that's who's got the helicopter footage of that whole crime scene. And that whole crime scene was, that whole area, it was big as a football field, like they said. It was decorated. It had like flags, like sheets with shit painted on it, symbols painted on it, smiley faces painted on it, stars painted on it, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, it was riddled with all kinds of stuff. Dolls. It was said, yeah, just stuffed animals, and that's what we see. What looks to be toys in the back of Ron Logan's truck at the way station or the garbage dump or whatever. It appears to be that he could be unloading some toys. I don't know. Robert Ives was asked about it by a reporter. He did not deny it. He said all he could say about it is it looked like somebody went into the local Goodwill store and went to that department and bought up everything in that department. But yes, he was referring to the toys. He said that you could stand from the hill, which was up by Weber's, and look down and see the cabin. He goes, or I should say the crime scene. And and that's from Robert Ives. He said a cabin, just like, the comment about the shack. It's got validity to it. And there's the text from uh, um, Tara's ex-husband, Josh. I can't remember his last name. It starts with an L. But he made a text about 12:30 that night and said that the girls were still in the cabin. And that was about 12:30. Yeah, remember that too. So, nonetheless, there's a lot of things that people seem to, leave out. You can't dismiss Erskine's text. That's David Erskine, or what is that his name? David, you can't excuse you cannot dismiss them. You can't do that. I mean, those are legitimate. Those were right in the time of it. That's in the thick of it, and you can't take them back. It was matter of fact. Sergeant Riley in the very beginning said it was like helter skelter. That's what he portrayed the whole crime scene as. It was helter skelter. Um, and that all the people that handled the crime scene were in trauma and had to go to professionals to seek mental help for what they had to see and whatnot. It was so gruesome. But yet during trial, they wrap it up like, nothing that severe happened to the girls. They made it just like so cut and dry, like nothing. And I don't know. I don't get it. But nonetheless, I mean, I don't know what happened out there that day, but I know there was family out there. I know law enforcement was in the area. So that's where your story's going to be at. And I do believe the original story about Derek German snitching. And like I said, he's a meth cook. And that's a big boy. I mean, Mike Patty's Hell's Angels, right? Derek's a big fish. And Derek turned state's evidence on some bigger fish. And some people went down for a long time. They lost their children. Not one person. There's more than one person that lost their kids. So you got a lot of people out there in that kind of a world that are gunning for you. And if you're a confidential informant, Derek, you know damn well they're not going to come after you. They're going to come around after somebody that is close to you or is around you, because you're untouchable, because you're law enforcement, you're a confidential informant, and law enforcement's going to protect them at all costs. You are law enforcement's top asset, and they will protect Derek German at all costs. Yeah, they will. Over his own daughter, yes, they will. Because, Derek makes the case, not the kids. Derek's the witness to it all. He's the cook. So, like I said, some people would be gunning for him, and they all knew it. They all knew it. So either they knew what was going down and partook into what was going down in them woods that day, or this shit's all fucking made up. Because family has a lot to do with it. And I believe, like I said in the beginning, they didn't say exactly who dropped the girls off, but they ended up landing on Kelsey, which I believe they did that. And if it's true, that's true. That's cool. But if not, they put Kelsey out at 15, 16 years old. She was a minor, right? 16? She was a minor. They put her out front to handle the media and to take a lot of the blows for the family, in my opinion, because she was also untouchable. But FBI did interrogate her like 7 times, even at school. So, and the Anthony Shots account, Sergeant Riley said in an interview that the Anthony Shots account either pinged or registered or whatever. He goes, however that stuff works, but it touched their account at the Patty household. He said, however that happened, because he was not tech savvy, but he knew that the Anthony Shots account registered at the Patty household. So, nonetheless, I mean that speaks a lot too, because the night at the police station, Kelsey contacted the Anthony Shots account, and the first thing she asked is, "Did you hear what happened?" Now, if you're looking for your sister and you're getting a hold of a stranger through this account, is the first thing you're going to ask is, "Did you hear what happened?" No, you wouldn't. You'd be like, "Hey, my name is Kelsey. Have you talked to my sister lately? I'm on her phone, blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Have you talked to my sister lately? Or have you seen my sister?" But I wouldn't be like, "Did you hear what happened?" So that's a red flag for me as well. And then she denied the Anthony Shots account until she could not deny it no more. Till years later. But so she has been caught into some pretty tight places. But like I said, being a minor, I think the family fed her to the people, fed her to the public. Old Johnny Public tore her shit up. But that's what the family wanted, you know what I mean? Because who's going to blame the sister, She's still a kid, too. Which, I don't know. There was too many things that day, and like I said, cops calling the search off. What did they do overnight? What did law enforcement do overnight? All that law enforcement, all that help. That's a lot of law enforcement, and that's a lot of help. So what did they do? Because choppers were already in the air the next day. News choppers, state boy choppers. So, yeah, it was crazy. And law enforcement didn't go into the crime scene first. They waited. They were told to wait for the dogs and let the dogs go in first. And that's how that went down. It's all on the dispatch or whatever. It's all out there. Every last bit of it. And if any channel that has had any really good information, like the Text 911, that old Joe Guthrie guy, he had Abby's 911 texts, emergency texts, and they drove that dude crazy. He pulled all his shit. He pulled that video down because he got so much harassment. So if you find something, just be easy on that creator. There's a couple videos out there that have a lot of there are a lot of validity to them, and that are right from day one. That need to be left alone, because if Johnny Public, everybody goes to that page, there's going to be an asshole that screws it up for everyone, and that person's going to end up, that content's going to end up also being gone. And anybody that's followed this case any amount of time, you know what I'm saying. So, but nonetheless, I'm done ranting for the moment. It gives you guys a lot to think about. Whatever. Nothing's gonna change until the story changes and the truth starts coming out. The story that's out there, that's been out there for years now, cannot keep being repeated. It just can't, or it's gonna remain the same. Stay safe and stay blessed.